Welcome, and thank you for joining the lucky 7th ReThink Health Toolbox webinar. My name is Maggie Cook, and I'm a Strategic Partnerships Manager at the Rippel Foundation. Whether you're new to Rippel or we're old friends, we're so grateful to have you all here. If you are attending your first Toolbox webinar today, rest assured you don't have to have attended prior sessions in order to fully engage with the material we'll be sharing today. To orient us today, I wanted to share briefly where we've been and what brings us here today. Our previous webinars have covered many topics, such as an introduction to the vital conditions for health and well-being, an introduction to shared stewardship, and most recently, an introduction to resident engagement. Recordings of past webinars are available on our website. Today, we're so pleased to be joined by TheCaseMade, whom we have proudly teamed up with to advance the growing movement of building the will to thrive together, as we believe we can and must bridge differences and move beyond issues that divide us and prevent progress. The intent of the Toolbox webinar series is really to help us all embrace our role in transformative systems change. It's also a way for us at the Rippel Foundation to share a one-on-one level introduction to ReThink Health's tools, practices, and frameworks proven to drive this change. We want to name that all of us here are entering the conversation today with our own unique perspectives, and some of us are deep in the work and have a breadth and depth of experience, while others may be newer to these practices. Today, our primary intention is that each of us, no matter where we are along our journey, walks away with a basic understanding of what we mean by building the will. Please note that later on, we'll also open it up to group discussion to dive a little deeper into any questions you may be holding. But for now, a few practical notes on norms. Please feel free to share your questions and reflections in the chat as we go. We'll address them as best we can live, and we'll also do so during Q&A. If you'd like to access closed captions or live transcription, we've enabled those functions, which you can initiate in the bottom ribbon of your screen. We also encourage you to turn your camera on if possible. We hope you can get grounded in this shared space and experience connectedness with those around you. Lastly, please note that a link to the recording of today's presentation, including the slides and supporting materials, will be emailed to you within a week's time or so. Given the holiday next week, give us a little extra time. All right, I am thrilled to introduce today's presenters. From the Rippel Foundation, today we'll be hearing from Becky Payne, President and CEO, and Catherine Wright, Deputy Director of Strategic Initiatives. And from TheCaseMade, today we'll be hearing from Dr. Tiffany Manuel, Founder and CEO, and Lindsay Nuts, Managing Director, Impact Strategies. I'll first turn it over to Catherine Wright to walk us through the intentions for today's session. Catherine?
Thanks, Maggie. So excited to see so many familiar and new faces here. Our intentions for today that Maggie beautifully shared already a little bit is to give a little bit of background and the strategies of the Build Collective Will work that we're doing together. There's also some other materials we have on our website that you can look at as well. We'll share those. Also share the playbook for establishing the vital conditions everyone needs for well-being, and what those are and how they connect to the playbook itself. Illustrate how strategic case-making and shared stewardship can advance a growing movement to thrive together, which is why we're all here. And describe some ways to take the work forward to deepen practice in those concepts, particularly through partnership and co-design. So we're excited to have this space today. We'll kick it back to you, Dr. T.
Great. So I'm excited to join you all today. This is first of all, this has been just an opportunity from our vantage point at the CaseMade to align with an organization that has a lot of passion for thinking about population health and how we thrive together overall. And so when we decided to think together about how we might partner to best support some of the amazing work happening in the field, around population health, around health equity, around thriving together, more generally speaking, we were really intentional about wanting that work to lift up the amazing work that was happening in the sometimes in the unlikeliest places. The kinds of work that was happening kind of in spite of the environments around us, in spite of the crazy politics around us, in spite of, the conversations that have scarcity written all over them when we wanted to talk about the abundance of the moment. And so, you'll see as we talk about the work, and definitely embedded in the playbook itself, is a very intentional effort to say, we know that there are a lot of systemic challenges that we face as a field that can feel unyielding, like concrete, right, around us. But even in those circumstances, we have seen the most beautiful kinds of flowers emerge in places where you wouldn't expect it. We look across the country and we see flowers that are blooming in terms of everyday people joining together in solidarity, right? Lifting each other up and the communities around them in the most beautiful ways of mutual aid and thoughtful sort of system support. We see community leaders who are listening deeply to residents about what they want, about what they see for the future, helping them really reimagine, right? How they can better connect to the resources for well-being in their own communities, and how they can help align more resources for folks, right, who need some of those resources for well-being. And we see health and community practitioners, right, reinventing ways that they work together, right, even in spite of, as I talked about before, the challenges of institutions that are sometimes rigid and not terribly sort of ready to let folks to do the work that we know needs to happen. And so this work, from my vantage point, is really rooted in finding those places, finding the spots of work that are really working well, and figuring out how we can break up the concrete around them, and having more of the stuff that is life-giving, right, for us to grow. And I want to say too, just as we start this conversation, that many of you may be in very different parts of your journey as stewards, right? In some places, you are actively, right, you've got concrete all around you and you're trying to figure out, just if you can't break up the concrete, at least how to get more flowers through the cracks, right? And that's the kind of work that you need to do in order to grow and scale the resources for well-being in your own community. In other places, it's not that there's so much concrete consistently all around you, but it means that the ground around you just may not be ready for the kinds of things that you want to plant. And so the ground around you, right, has been in land that's been long forgotten, is underused, is undervalued, or under-resourced. And there's an opportunity, right, for thinking about how you till the soil so that you can start to grow and fertilize things that can grow there. And in still other places, it really means bringing more seeds. It's like the ground is ready, the soil has been tilled and it's ready and it's ripe. But you need more gardeners, right? More champions of the work that you want to be able to do. And you need the seeds to be able to do that so that you can scale, right? What could possibly grow there. And I want to say, wherever you are on that journey, at the front, at the back, in the middle, like whatever, right, it looks like in terms of your community, that the skill sets around shared stewardship and around case making can help you do some of the work to grow and scale what's bubbling up there. So let's go to the next slide. So I talked about the sort of two practices that are in the playbook itself. One is around shared stewardship. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But hopefully most of you on this call have been either in meetings with the CaseMade team or in work that we've done or know of our work. But it really is centered around something called strategic case making. And this is a very thoughtful framework for how to do the work of making the case around things that are just hard. When you've got concrete all around you, you got to break up some of that concrete, or you got to figure out how to till the soil, or you got to figure out how to bring new gardeners and seeds to the activity. There are sort of both time-tested, but also, I would say, social science-based ways of being able to do that. And we've tried to put that together in a framework to make it a lot easier for folks to do that. So things like starting conversations or starting your work by connecting to people's aspirations is huge, right? We often think that the way that we want to start conversations is to launch into the diatribe of all the things, right, politically, socially, economically, that we need. But what we know from a lot of social science, right, is that the way to do that is to connect to folks, whoever the folks are in front of you, or if it's a research report, to connect to the folks that you hope that research is about to connect with, and lift up their aspirations first, right? Because it calls them forward in a new kind of way. And there are lots of other principles, like naming the power of the moment is huge for thinking about urgency. Principles like telling people what they will lose if they stay on the sidelines, things that we know will connect them better to the work. So we won't have the time to share all this with you, but a thoughtful, considered practice of strategic case making can help you do that. And it's part of the work that we want to bring to this community of folks that is trying to build and grow, right, those flowers. Let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to take just a page out of the playbook itself. And believe me, I know there's a lot of writing on the slide. There's absolutely no intention that you should be reading anything on this slide except to say that there is a lot of very intentional work put into the playbook itself, to even at the very top of your journey, at the very start of the journey with case making, being able to connect to the things that you need in your journey. So in that principle one that I talked about, connecting to people's aspirations, right? Being very thoughtful about what you're hearing in your community and either mirroring that back to folks, right? Is super powerful when we talk about kind of what it means, right? In the middle of that section, mirroring as a skill set that you can develop. And or, right, appreciative inquiry, asking the kinds of questions that helps people to sort of focus and appreciate what's working now and focus on what they can do in the future. So the way that might look, for example, when we did we did lots of interviews before writing the playbook, one of the things we heard lots of health and community practitioners say very early on is that the work that they were doing just felt really hard. But when we asked them to talk about the things that we know lots of things during the pandemic did not go so well. So let's just say that. But we asked them to think about what during the pandemic worked really well that they want to take into the future or take into the next phase of their work. They started just rattling off all this amazing work that they had done right in the midst of that they wanted to be able to take forward. And the energy of the conversation completely shifted. That's a lot of the skill set, right, of a good case maker. You know that the conversations in the rooms that you're in can be really heavy. We're in a moment right now that can feel really heavy for a lot of us, but asking the kinds of questions that get people to think about what they're hopeful about, what's working in their communities, what they want to take into their future, what they're excited about, changes the energy of those conversations and allow you to open people up to the possibilities of what you have to offer. So I want to stop there. I think there are lots of ways that we might have, we're looking for the opportunity actually to seed more of this this practice and more of this thinking into the work around thriving together. And so we're going to be asking you questions at the end, all about the kind of things that you're looking to take into the future of your work and how we might best be able to support you as you do that. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. T. Welcome, everybody. I echo the welcome of seeing new faces we've known a long time, and some of you who've been away for a while maybe and are getting to know us. We've used some terms already in this presentation that those of you who've been able to join this webinar series will have a deep understanding of. For some of you, you may have a vague understanding, and for others, it may be brand new. So stewardship is a really important concept. It comes through deeply in the playbook. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I do want to acknowledge that it is core content and a very intentional language and vocabulary that we use. There are a critical set of capacities that we have studied and seen demonstrated among those who work effectively to bridge differences, to anchor in shared values, and to build momentum toward the kind of systems change that we're talking about. And what I really want you all to hear today is that the fact that you're here on this webinar, I am pretty certain I could count you as a steward, and we want you to see yourselves as stewards. It is very intentionally not about holding positional, traditional leadership roles, traditional purse strings, but about a set of capacities, a way you engage in the world around you, and the people you need to bring with you to affect the kind of change that you are seeking within your community. And so we will drop links. You can listen to the 101 version of this webinar series about shared stewardship, and the playbook will give you a much deeper dive about how those practices that we have studied apply in this context. it's also really important that when we were thinking about our work and the stewardship capacities in light of the vision that we see for what we're trying to accomplish, strategic case making is one of those critical core foundational pieces and capacities that stewards need to have. And so we don't try to choose favorites among the stewardship capacities, but there are some that are incredibly foundational, and strategic case making is one of those. And so that's also a little bit of why we looked to Dr. T and her talented team and their expertise in strategic case making to help us craft a playbook that would bring these two core skill sets together. If you want to go to the next slide, Maggie. The other critical foundational piece to thinking about the rest of the conversation we'll have today is recognizing the importance of vital conditions. Again, that is one of our core frameworks, studied, vetted, and validated with hundreds of contributors and field builders like yourselves. And it is a really important concept. We've had a webinar on that. You can also go get more information on that. But it anchors in belonging and civic muscle and the kinds of conditions that we all need to have in place and to be robustly invested in order to achieve thriving. And so some of you may be familiar with social determinants of health. This is kind of an activating framework that lets us get really specific and clear on what kinds of investments help us make action and progress on improving those social determinants of health. It also acknowledges that vital conditions are wrapped in legacies of our ancestors, and that we have the power to choose and think critically about what kind of legacies we want to set the stage for our future generations. So thinking about not just 1, 2, 3 generations out, if you're thinking about the kind of legacies we want to be a part of creating, what decisions would you make differently today than if you're thinking about a budget cycle or an election cycle? And so the playbook, stewardship capacities, and anchoring in vital conditions really help you think differently about the choices you're making, the initiatives you're designing, and who you're bringing to the table to think about that kind of legacy work. Next slide. So these next 2 slides are a little bit of pulling back the curtain, again, in the spirit of being fully transparent with you. Dr. T mentioned that we know we need to seed this work and these capacities in many more places across the country. We see ourselves as a catalytic philanthropy and nonprofit who the only way we are successful is by getting many others to join us in working toward legacies for thriving together. We talk a lot about the 3 horizons. This is also a concept that has been shared in detail in a previous webinar. The basic thing, if you didn't participate in those webinars, is when you think about how to create transformational change, what they refer to, what futurists refer to in this framework as the 3rd horizon. Recognizing that we are anchored currently in a horizon characterized, no surprises, with deep polarization and fragmentation. Doing nothing keeps us on that track. There is a future where we embrace that interdependence, but there has to be a set of practices that bridge between today and that future. We recognize in this moment, in all of our scouting and talking to thoughtful leaders and observing what other organizations are doing, this concept of an exhausted majority. Part of our sort of stagnation, if you will, and not making more progress is that we are fracturing ourselves in all of our various movements. And so when we started on this work, we were really curious about, rather than convincing everyone to sign on to a single agenda, how could we leverage what we see as aligned interests among folks who are working tirelessly around multiracial, multi-identity democracy, who are trying to reimagine our economy and think about ways that our economy can produce more than just wealth for a few, but truly invest in those conditions that create well-being. And of course, in Rippel and ReThink Health, those who are thinking about health system transformation and really returning to health and care and systems that produce health and well-being in sustainable ways. And we realized that there is a well-documented, and many of you may feel like this at times, group called the exhausted majority, that are folks who think about the same kind of future that ancestral view of what we all share in common. They want the same things for the future, but they're not finding outlets in the current movements or in the current constituencies. They see division, they see polarization, they see extreme negative rhetoric, and they don't see opportunities to activate their agency in ways that align with their values. And I think we can all say there have been times probably in our own movements and our own desire to do good where we have fallen into some of those traps, as Dr. T was talking about. But so often, think about what gets you out of your living room and into the community center, or to give your time on a Saturday to volunteer within your community. It's not when somebody is horribly negative. It is when you say, you know what, they're working toward that thing that I was hoping for in my community. I finally see the vision that I had hoped for. There's somebody else speaking my language, and it's positive and it's hopeful. And it's what I want to be able to tell my kids and my grandkids. When that moment happened, I did this thing. I participated. I wasn't just sitting behind a keyboard or at home. So how do you activate that exhausted majority? Again, when we look at the stewardship practices, we just had a moment as a foundation where we said we need to go all in partnership with the CaseMade and really activate and cultivate the skill set of strategic case making, because every movement we touch would be so much better off with an infusion of that now in this moment, in addition to the rest of the stewardship skills that we can wrap around that going into the future. So next slide. Lastly, I will just say, again, this is pulling back the curtain and breaking all kinds of rules for a high-level webinar. But I think it's really important that we are honest with you about what we are up to as an organization, because again, we are only successful as Rippel and ReThink Health by getting many more people activated than we can possibly personally touch. We've got a 10-year plan for our roadmap for the future. We thought it was really important to think about a decade out. We've also got a 70-year history of investing in improving health and well-being, and a pivot almost now 2 decades ago to think about ReThink Health. And you can learn more about that historical transition on our website. But this is in our DNA, to constantly question what we're doing today and see if there's a better way, a more strategic way to align and catalyze others to act alongside of us. We recognize that we are at a point after many action learning cycles where our tools and our frameworks are stabilized. We've demonstrated the impact they can have when we get in close partnership in place with other change makers, but we need to be able to take that to scale. And again, to do that, we need to activate many people to use our tools and resources and the lessons we've learned, in many cases, perhaps without us walking alongside them. And so we have this webinar series that we've done. We've revamped our website. And this infusion that I'm talking about building the will, we have gone deep in our investment as a foundation in partnership with Dr. T to say, this moment right now, especially in a run-up to a very divisive election cycle where people think that change is about a single day in November where we will vote and then we're just left to take whatever the results are. We actually want to turn the engine of civic engagement in an ongoing way. November will happen. That day will come and go. We will have a result, and we all have to get up the next day and return to the work that we're doing to try to improve our communities. And so how do we start to seed the capacity and conversations that help us transcend the division and focus on the real legacies we're trying to seed? So I talked a little bit about the multi-solving that we tried to do in the playbook, and you'll hear more about that. But as you get into that, I want you to see that that playbook, while it uses certain specific examples, it is designed to meet you with whatever you and your community's priorities are. These tactics are not about us saying, this is the single most important policy agenda that everybody should be building will around. We were purposely agnostic about what the specific priority is so that you can learn the capacities and the skills that let you apply these for whatever is your priority in your community. Our hope going forward, and this is where we need to know your interest, we need to know what capacity you have to join us in deeper practice. And we are deeply engaged in conversations about co-investment. We think that the playbook is great. We know you need to practice, and we know you need to practice in community with others. So Catherine and Lindsay will say more about that. But our long arc goal of this is to be able to support communities of practice to help you apply these lessons and find each other and find inspiration, and also know that you are not alone. There are others working alongside you all across the country. These are not coastal progressive initiatives. We are sprinkled throughout in transpartisan ways. And again, the reason I show you all of this is that we are firmly anchored in our organization's North Star, which we also recognize many others are joining us on this notion of having a future where all people and places can thrive with no exceptions. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to jump in here. It's so great to see so many old and new friends joining for this conversation. I just also want to express our deep gratitude to our friends at the Rippel Foundation for this partnership. And we're really excited to be able to come to all of you today to share more about our hope for the future. So my job is to talk a little bit more about how we created the playbook that Dr. T and Becky described, what's in it, and our vision for how to put it into practice. We started by talking to dozens and dozens of everyday leaders across the country, community groups from Connecticut to California, folks in Kentucky and the Pacific Northwest. I got to talk to a couple of middle school students in Maine, which was just so cool. And it was, all of that listening was so fun, but it was also incredibly informative to hear how folks respond to questions like 15 years from now, what do you want the world to look like? How do the solutions you're working toward right now, or what you're seeing happen in the world around you, help us get to that future? And what narratives do you wish you were hearing instead of what you're hearing right now in your community? We're just super grateful to all of the folks who shared their time and wisdom and dreams with us. So that deep listening helped us help to inform the development of our playbook for building support for the hard stuff that we know you all are trying to advance in your communities to make sure we can thrive together. That listening also informed, as Becky said, our North Star for our collaboration together. What we heard from the folks that we listened to is that we all want a world where all people can thrive together with no exceptions, where everyone has what they need for their health and well-being, and where future generations have what they need to reach their full potential. We're not going to be able to go into the playbook here today with this short amount of time, but what you'll find in it are ways to think about how to create the kinds of conditions that help you persuade folks that you need to step forward. More background on how to use our frameworks to build your skills around shared stewardship, shepherded by the Rippel Foundation, and then strategic case-making that was developed by Dr. T. And you'll see Dr. T walked us through how to apply the first principle of case-making to what we're solving for as we work to build more support for systems transformation. But there are 9 more case-making principles that the playbook walks through in a lot more depth. And it also includes an invitation to practice stewardship and case-making, which is what brings us to this conversation today. The playbook, I will say, is really just a starting point. It is not the end game. We hope it serves as a platform that allows us to support you much more deeply as you're diving into your work and really working to make sure that your communities can be places where everybody has the chance to thrive. It is also about the how, as Becky said, not about the what, because we know that you, in partnership with folks across your communities, are best positioned to understand the soil that you're working in and to decide what ideas are most ripe for planting to get us to a much more just future. And the principles of equity and inclusion and racial justice are woven throughout the playbook and are really foundational to everything that you'll see there and to the work that we're hopefully going to be able to partner with you on in the future. Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine, and we're going to talk to you a little bit more about what a partnership with CaseMade and Rippel could look like.
Thanks, Lindsay. So as Becky, Dr. T, Lindsay all shared, to build the will to thrive together, and with everyone thriving, no exceptions, we want to build capacity among stewards that are here on this call and beyond, and create spaces and experiences to, as Becky said, practice in community with others, really building on the playbook. And so we know there are many ways to think about amplifying your work, building support for your own work, using the context, place, histories, and our, as you can tell, favorite analogy, the flowers, the soil, the concrete, in using the playbook and its concepts of shared stewardship and strategic case making. So we wanted to share a few of the experiences we've been thinking about as part of, like, what does it look like to do this in practice with others, and how do we activate and build capacity among those who are interested and want to spread this further and farther in their own networks. So I will note that these are some ideas we've had, and all what we're talking about can be customized and built for your audience, your place, and your own priorities. So first is this idea of kind of a regional workshop. We had a really amazing event almost a month ago, over a month ago. And what we saw is really the joy and energy that can come from a single event, single workshop, of bringing people, individuals, organizations, and even networks together as some kind of kickoff really around these core concepts in the playbook. And what does it look like to talk amongst themselves, get a shared language and a sense of purpose of what the work looks like in any one region, and really almost kick off even more energy towards the issue or galvanizing thing you're working on. Another we've talked about is I heard both Dr. T and Becky talk about, is really this capacity building. So how do we help other stewards particularly build their own capacity to then go out and influence other individuals, organizations, and even their own networks across the country. And so we've been thinking of this kind of capacity building community of practice, which is a space for people to come together, probably across the country, virtually, with kind of a region or a place in mind, to learn and kind of try on these concepts of strategic case making and shared stewardship, to see how it fits into their context. What does it look like to bring support to amplify their own work using the lenses of these concepts? And the goal is really to beef up people's ability to use those concepts with the knowledge, the training, the coaching, kind of over a short period of time, to build their capacity in their place and even within their own organization. And Lindsay, the place-based.
Wonderful. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah.
Yes, one of the other things that we would love to be able to offer you are place-based communities of practice that are really aimed at supporting a community or a region to make the best possible case for the work that you're doing around your systems change goals, and to deploy shared stewardship practices that will allow you to garner more support for your work. We see this as a much more intensive process where we could really come in and walk alongside you through a journey of really putting case making and shared stewardship into practice toward the pursuit of a very specific systems change goal that we know a community or a region already has in mind. So an example of this might be like a region who's trying to redesign their healthcare system. Our teams could provide intensive support to that region to get super clear about your vision for the future. That's really based on listening with all kinds of folks across your community, the steps and the timeline that it's going to take to get there, the policy opportunities that you need to leverage in this moment to make the most of the moment that we have in front of us, identifying other future stewards that you most need alongside you, and then to develop a really strategic case for getting those stewards to join you and to stay with you as a part of a broader movement. So again, this is probably the most intensive journey that we envision, but we think there's a potential for just huge and incredible impact by being able to partner with and work alongside communities and regions. And then co-designed offerings that could be virtual, in-person trainings, coaching, or engagement. This is really, we want to just come alongside folks and understand, what do you need? What are the opportunities that you're seeing right now? What do you have the capacity for? What are you really hungry for? And we want to be really flexible to be able to co-design a learning journey alongside you that best meets you where you are. And so we're pretty flexible about how we would think about doing that and want the opportunity to co-create it with you. All right. I think from there, I'm handing it back to you, Maggie.
Yes, thanks, Lindsay. And just a quick reminder, we're going to open it up to some live discussion in just a bit to address any questions you may be holding. But first, we're going to take a quick little survey, and pardon me while I toggle around and grab that. One sec.
I love seeing all of your faces.
I know.
All in one place.
Let me share my screen again, and we're going to go to the Menti slide. Okay, so Catherine, were you able to add in the chat? If you are able to, you can access this survey by either scanning that QR code, or Catherine's also going to drop a direct link to the Mentimeter in the chat, and you can insert the code for the specific survey. But the question is, what are the biggest challenges you face in building support for your work? So this will be a word cloud, and your responses will all appear. If they appear larger, it is because more than one person responded the same way. So let's take a couple of minutes and just add your input there. If anyone's having issues accessing the Menti, just let me know. So yeah, we're seeing shifting away from urgent needs, fragmentation, continuity. Of course, we hear that a lot. Changes within organizations, shifting of priorities with new leadership, sustained communication. It's like overwhelm. I feel you. Distrust. Funding is certainly coming to the fore here. Polarization, lack of transparency. Beautiful. We can keep this, I think maybe I'll keep presenting this for a little while we open it back up to Becky and Dr. T to address any questions you may have. And please be thinking in the back of your mind, anything, you want to bring up, experiences that you've had where you think building the will could have been a powerful tool.
Yeah, I'm seeing a divergence of responses, a lot of smaller responses, which is not surprising and reflects everyone's individual experience. But yet I think if we clustered and kind of made themes out of this, there's a lot of similarity. Funding, of course, is always an issue, but when we get past that, the fragmentation, the polarization, the disinformation, fear, apathy, and I think I want to invite Dr. T to speak to those a little bit. I sort of want to say, amen. That's exactly what we were intuiting in the field when we step back to say, what do we want to make our next big investment in? And want to both, again, let you know you're not alone, and that there are real examples that are not just lucky and serendipity, but real practice and discipline and tools and approaches that we can help you bring to thinking about the things you're trying to tackle, and getting out of that sort of frozen, the sky is falling, this is too big, we can't overcome, to the posture of actually, if you stepwise through some things, and break it down, and stay open and anchor in what you share in common with your fellow community members about your aspirations for the future, and start there before you talk about the things you think you disagree on based on your car or your zip code or your, the style of clothing you're wearing or where your kids go to school. Really think about the future. That is the whole point of strategic case making, and anchoring in the values and practices of what stewards bring to this. But Dr. T, I know you've faced a number of these same issues in communities that you've worked in. So I wonder if you want to reflect on helping to uplift the mood of the room.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. And when I look at this, what I see in this word cloud is this is the concrete, right? This is all the stuff. This is the sort of place where we're living. Yet, we're all sort of here, right, as little flowers, like trying to push more of the fantastic buds kind of above the ground here. And the good news is when I look at the list, what's interesting to me is there's nothing on this list that feels insurmountable. It certainly requires a lot of thinking, strategic thinking. It certainly, requires a lot of restructuring of things. It certainly requires a shift in mindset of maybe some of us in the room, but also the folks we're talking to. But nothing here feels insurmountable, which is the good news, right? There are no sort of hard and fast things that can't be shifted. So the opportunity is to think together as a community about how we support one another in breaking some of these things down. And the work that we do at the CaseMade across the country, and the same is true for Rippel Foundation, like we are actively working in a number of different places from our vantage point, both in the US and Canada, to do this work, right? Because I think, I'm so inspired because I think that, the value system that that we are leaning into as a nation, as hard as it is, right? We're leaning into one of thriving, leaning into one of equity, leaning into one of inclusion, leaning into one of connection. And for lots of folks, that's hard, right? So, our opportunity here is to help folks see that actually this can work. It's not insurmountable. It's not about scarcity. It's that we have abundance. And our ability, as you said, Becky, to sort of stepwise through that, right? Not all of that happens in one day, but the gradual sort of steps to get there together and supporting each other is what I think helps us overcome this. And I want to say too, I said this in some of the work that my team has been doing around the homelessness space, and certainly around housing and childcare and other kinds of things that we're working on. But when I look at this list, I know for sure that we're going to win, right? That's the thing, right? And the reason we're going to win, because you look at all the things that are happening, we can't continue to sustain the way that we've been moving without significant changes in ways that open up the space for equitable communities. You can't keep kind of going in the same way and not shift. And so we're going to win. The only question for me is kind of what's the pathway to get us there? So I'm excited about it. We're on the journey to do it. We want to partner with you all to figure out ways in which we do that, but also how we partner together to support each other as we help to move the rest of the nation, right, into the awareness of the fact that there's a different world, folks, and it's coming, right? It's a lot better than what we got, right? And we all deserve it. So happy to see the word cloud and excited to see what comes next.
I want to just pause. I'm trying to see if anybody's coming off mute or raising a hand. And I know we have some of our folks who actually participated in listening sessions and contributed to the work of the Playbook, but also who joined us at our small session in Atlanta. So I just want to also pause and invite if anybody wants to reflect on what this means for you, some of the challenges you're facing and how you're thinking of them. For those of you who had a little bit longer on-ramp to being exposed to the Playbook and hearing us talk about this ambitious hope for the future. I know we have some colleagues who joined us, or anyone else. Again, I'm trying to look to see if anybody's sending a signal by coming off mute or turning your camera on, but We have a lot of colleagues here.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. I'm also comfortable with silence. I was a crisis counselor for a long time, so. David talking about fighting fragmentation and collaborating. Yeah. Anything else you want to say? KPIs and not for what they achieve synergistic.
Yeah, how do,
Yeah.
Dr. T, I've been hearing about you from so many people. It's nice to see you for once. How do you overcome that, all of that entropy, all of those rewards that are pushing people to stay in their little sector?
Yeah, I think so. So I think there's the synergy that we're talking about between sort of shared stewardship and case making is a set of skills and practices to help you do that. So I give you bad news and good news. Bad news is there isn't a sort of one size fits all strategy. There isn't kind of a 3x5 curve with a couple words that I can tell you to say, just go out and say this. It brings everybody forward. It makes them excited. It gets them happy. It shows them the way forward. I wish there was. And I can tell you that all the messaging and communications folks they've been searching for decades, it doesn't exist. If there was, we would have found it already, right? Because there's enough polling data, blah, 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 to try and do that. That just suggests to us that that's not the way to go. And I'd also say, even if there were, if somebody could say, well, for the moment, if you just say these three things, the nature of the environment that we're in is so dynamic. My God, every day it's like we're going in a different direction. I'm like, I thought we were going that way, and as a nation, we're going that way, and then we're going that way. And it's like, even if we gave you that, right, the sort of magic, whatever that is for the moment, tomorrow it would be out of date. So what we've landed on is that there are a set of practices, right, that are leadership practices that allow us to be adaptive in the moment that help to do that. Speaking in every moment to people's aspirations, right? What they don't want is a whole long laundry list of policy prescriptions and stuff that we think are great, which which we have developed, which we think could be great for the country and for the future. They don't want to have to sit down and study public policy. They want to feel like the future is bright and that they want to feel like there's an opportunity for, as Bobby put in the chat, that we can be good ancestors to folks, that we're leaving a legacy for our children that feels brighter than the one we got. And like, where is that? And they don't want the phony baloney politicians speak, right? You have to be able to do some of that, the conversation, but you got to follow that up with real live, making the case for things that are really credible, that where they're proven solutions. The good news for us, so that was kind of the bad news. No, 3x5 card with magic words on it happens. But the good news for us is there's just a lot of opportunity to do this in the moment because there is so much angst and anxiety, because people are watching what's happening and going, this is not it. This is not it. This doesn't make sense. And when the folks are in that moment, there's an opportunity to talk about what could be different, to show those flowers that are blooming in places. Listen, we got some great models that are actually working to do the thing you said you want. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it feels like. Here's who's involved. Here's what you need. Help us bring more champions to this. So anyway, all that to say, no easy fixes, but a lot of opportunity in the moment and practices that we know, right, can help to do that. And that's essentially what we want to bring to this community, is like what those practices are, and then to share them, right? There may be some practices that are not even on the list yet, right? But that people are finding in community that are working, where they bring back to this community and say, oh, let me tell you what we just did in Toledo. Let me tell you what we just did in Akron. Or let me tell you what we just did in San Francisco, right? We're working with folks in a different way, and we want to share with other folks who are trying to do the same. So hope that's helpful.
Dr. T and Becky, we have a hand raised too.
Awesome. Oh, thank you, Maggie.
Do you
Good
pronounce
afternoon.
Fode?
Fode, exactly.
Fode.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my first time, and it's definitely inspiring, so it won't be my last time. I'd be curious to know more about how do you learn about how you learn? And an example of that would be, what are some of the patterns that you're noticing? How do you learn about the patterns across the different communities that you have? And do you have an example of a story that exemplified that? Thank you.
Dr. T, do you want to take that? Or do you want me to take a stab and then?
I'll come behind you.
Okay. So, this is where we disappoint people all the time. There's no shortcut. And I kind of said the same thing in the chat. We listen, we make sure that we are in deep partnership with folks on the ground, and we actively, and this is another new and emerging muscle we're building within Rippel. And you hear about this from lots of folks right now, but we're really putting effort and energy behind scouting and capturing stories from communities, not national change makers, but folks on the ground in communities of all sizes and all landscapes and geographies. And then using our platforms to share those stories. So we do some sense making, what we call sense making, sorry to use jargon, in conversation with staff, in conversation and convenings, with thought partners in our networks. We're always happy to have a conversation. So Fode, if you would like to do some of that, please follow up with us. We do have the privilege of living in a very thoughtful space at times. And then we turn that back and we share that. And sometimes that happens one-on-one in our coaching and our close partnership arrangements. But sometimes that manifests in things like the Playbook. And so if you were connecting with us 10 years ago, you would not have found the vital conditions. You would not have found such a tight articulation of stewardship. Or even the Thriving Together North Star, not because that's new for us, but in our listening and our working with partners, we are constantly turning what we're hearing into the frameworks and tools that we put out. And when we do that, because we get the privilege of connecting with so many people, we feel very strongly that we make those available to the field. So by the time we are putting a tool or a framework out, or I think Dr. T, the same thing with strategic case making, what you are seeing is reflective of the themes, the lessons, the things that we can stand behind as validated, sound practices. It is also the frustrating part because we won't give you answers to what your thing in your community should be, but we will help you learn a way to be in your community and to engage with others in your community that lets you identify your own themes and craft a plan that is grounded in your local context and in your local reality.
Thank you for so many thoughtful questions. We're going to be, unfortunately, closing this out. There will be more opportunities to continue the conversation. Once again, today we've heard an introduction to building the will to thrive together, and we got to see some examples of what it looks like in practice, especially as it relates to shared stewardship and strategic case making. We shared with you how we're thinking about taking the work forward. We hope that the information and insights shared are helpful to you in your work, and to augment what was shared in this brief hour. On this slide, and Catherine will add to the chat some additional resources that you can access to learn more and deepen your own practice. As mentioned at the top of the call, the intent of this series is really to provide a 101 introduction to content, our tools and frameworks. If you're interested in learning more or going deeper into the content or partnering with us, please share in the brief interest form that is linked in the chat. Try to put everything in there. And also, feel free to reach out to me directly anytime and I can help connect. In order to diffuse efforts to navigate different futures and stewardship across the country and beyond, for it to really take hold as a way to drive transformational change, Rippel is committed to sharing stories of stewardship in action for others to see, learn from, and be inspired by. We invite you to share those stories with us at So please feel free to reach out directly to Layla Hussein, Layla Hussein, Rippel's Deputy Director of Communications, to share your story. And lastly, just a reminder that resources from today's webinar, including slides and the recording of today's session, will be emailed to those who registered and will also be uploaded to our website. So stay connected, be well, and thank you so much for joining us today.